It is time to get your waivers set for week number 10. It is the waiver wire Q&A right here on the FanDuel Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Periscope pages. We are getting set for your waivers for tonight in your season-long leagues, letting you know who you should pick up and whose stock is on the rise. My name is Jim Sanas. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by JJ Zachariason. He is the editor-in-chief of numberFire and FanDuel. JJ, week number 9 is in the books. How are you doing today?
Doing good. It's pretty wild that we're already at week 10. Like it went very, very, very fast, like faster than most seasons. But I can tell all of you right now that I am just as exhausted as I usually am around this point in time. So
potentially more so. Like usually you get like a break from football because you can like go outside, you can like do things, and now we're just kind of stuck inside and stuck consuming football at all times, which is fine. I mean, I'm not going to complain about consuming more football, but still. It's definitely, you can tell that we are on to week number 10. That is not a shock here by any means. As always, make sure you are getting your questions in over on the FanDuel YouTube page. We will start there. We'll also take some questions from Facebook, Twitch, and Periscope. And we go live 3 times per week. So make sure you subscribe on whatever your preferred platform is, because we are here every Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday. Friday at 3:30, we have our Snake Draft Q&A with JJ, myself, and Brandon Gadula. And then on Sunday at noon, JJ has a start-sit Q&A, taking your questions, getting you set before things get underway on Sunday. So lots of incentive to subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope pages. Also, we give away a ticket into the FanDuel Sunday Million every Friday. So make sure you tune in for that one as well. Friday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on all of these streaming services. Let's dive in here to the questions over on YouTube. First from Antoine. Antoine is asking, would you trade James Conner for Josh Allen? His other starting quarterbacks are Dalvin Cook and James Robinson. Or should he shoot off for Tua for waivers and keep Conner? Now, JJ, I'm not a huge James Conner guy, but I think if your only 2 running backs are Dalvin Cook and James Robinson, Conner in that situation would have more value, correct?
Yeah, the other thing about Josh Allen is that he's a quarterback who feasts on plus matchups. I mean, does unbelievably well. The splits with Allen when he faces a decent to a good team versus a team like Seattle this past week, they're massive. And down the stretch, he's not necessarily going to get that. You know, he's not going to face Seattle week in and week out. To me, you're buying Josh Allen high if you're trading for him right now. And to me also, you might be buying James, or you might be selling James Conner a little bit low, to be honest. You know, coming off a game where he was chalky, everyone thought that he was going to blow up, and then he didn't. So, you know, I think Connor's still in that like low end RB1, high end RB2 territory because the position is what it is. You know, just because you have those other guys, you know, Dalvin Cook and James Robinson, you know, I wouldn't be surprised either, Jim, if James Conner outscores James Robinson from here on out. We saw a decline a little bit with Chris Thompson back this past week with James Robinson, his target share. And they get very tough matchups down the stretch, specifically in the playoffs. And I'm a J-Rob truther, as you know. Yeah. So it's tough to say that, but yeah, I think that's too much to give up for Josh Allen.
The target share also went down because he has a quarterback who actually will throw the ball downfield. So there's that. Fair. Dan is asking, hey, Jim, your guy Justin Jackson, level of confidence moving forward, assuming he's healthy. Dan, we can't assume that, unfortunately. Like, I'd love to assume a lot of things, but it's hard to assume them when they're not the case. Jackson obviously pretty banged up right now. I think that, like, if everyone were to be healthy, you'd rank them Justin Jackson, Kalen Ballage, Joshua Kelly, but Jackson hurt again. He's been hurt a lot. He wasn't hurt a lot in college, like got a ton of carries there, but can't seem to stay healthy. So I can't really assume he's healthy given that he's not. So JJ, let's jump off this here and talk about that Chargers running back situation. What is your prioritization level of Kalen Ballage on waivers, given what we know as of right now regarding Jackson and Austin Eckler?
Is Kalen Ballage the most 2020 thing that could happen to fantasy football? I mean, I can't think
of launching bombs, but Monday Night Football might be up there.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I mean, look, I think Ballage is worthwhile off the wire this week. Am I going nuts to get him? I don't think it's necessary. You know, there's a lot of guys in that backfield that they've been rotating and just kind of trying out. I will say, you know, I watched that game and I rewatched it. And I usually just watch sort of like in condensed form, like on the side as I do my 15 transactions column on Monday. And I didn't think Ballage looked that bad. I mean, compared to what we've seen in the past. So I'm not against, trying to get him, but I wouldn't spend anything more than like 10% of my auction budget to get him probably.
And clearly Joshua Kelly just can't earn a job right now, which is not good for his forward-looking outlook. Jake is saying, hey guys, love your work. Would you be looking to trade away Adam Thielen? I have some ammo I could add up to trade up, but not sure if he'll bounce back. Now, my concern here, JJ, is kind of akin to what you're talking about with James Conner, where Thielen has fallen flat the past 2 weeks. One, because of a win game, and then last week because they had super positive game scripts. We know Minnesota's defense is not going to always have them in super positive game scripts. So I feel like it's probably not the ideal time to move Thielen. What are your thoughts on him going forward?
Yeah, I would agree. The other thing that I noticed, so I every week I send out a positional target share chart on Twitter. And this week I decided to split that up. Excuse me. I decided to split that up a little bit. And I looked at weeks 1 through 4 versus weeks 5 through 9. One of the biggest increases of all positional groups in target share from weeks 1 through 4 to weeks 5 through 9 was the Minnesota tight ends. They're starting to use the tight ends a little bit more. This past week, yes, game script didn't favor them, but both Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith had 20% target shares in that game. And that's not helpful. Like what we saw at the beginning of the season is that not only was Adam Thielen balling out, but Justin Jefferson was too, because they were funneling so many targets to those wide receivers, and that's not happening as frequently. So like you noted, Jim, you have these issues where they do get these positive game scripts and they're not going to throw the ball as much and they're going to be very conservative. That's not good. But then on top of that, they're utilizing their tight ends a little bit more, which we thought was going to happen entering the year. So to me, Thielen went from being almost a locked in top 5 or 6 option to maybe more of a high-end wide receiver 2 from here on out, just given, the competitiveness of the wide receivers and guys like Devontae Adams coming back.
And the other thing, too, that's like kind of concerning is that sometimes like there are multiple paths to failure for the Vikings. If they build a big lead, they're not going to use their receivers. And also like there are times where the offense just kind of stinks. And like that's also not good either. So multiple paths to failure, which is always kind of concerning for a wide receiver. Brian is asking, similar to the Thielen question, what about Tyler Lockett? Because Brian actually has both Tyler Lockett and Adam Thielen, so the past 2 weeks have not been fun. Yeah. Seems like he's overshadowed by DK Metcalf at this point. Lockett was a popular option in week number 9 in daily fantasy. He was detrimental to my bankroll, to say the least. Back-to-back bad outings, but we also know that Lockett can have spike weeks too. So what's your forward-looking outlook for Tyler Lockett?
Yeah, I mean, look, I wouldn't sell him. It's funny, I actually have a team also with Adam Thielen and Tyler Lockett, and it's not been very enjoyable the last couple of weeks. But yeah, I mean, look, DK Metcalf's the guy that you would want in that offense. Tyler Lockett, this season, throughout the season, has been a lot more, or much more of a roller coaster in terms of his production than DK Metcalf has. So, I mean, it depends on what the context is here. If you're comparing Tyler Lockett to DK Metcalf, you want DK Metcalf. You absolutely want DK Metcalf because not only has he been more consistent from a target share and a volume standpoint, but he's also seeing more touchdowns and end zone targets. So you know that that's going to be more consistent as well. Whereas Lockett just isn't on that level, right? But if you're comparing Lockett to basically any other wide receiver, other than like the top 5 or so guys, then sure, he's right there, because every other wide receiver is going to have this inconsistency. So it just depends on the context here. If I were to say, is Lockett a buy or a sell, I would lean more buy than sell because he's coming off these 2 games. So I want pieces of this offense, period.
And they're going to have a fun game this week against the Rams. Or at least I hope it's fun. That one should be a delight to watch. D Rose is asking Julio Jones or James Conner the rest of the season. Now, we were talking positively about James Conner in the sense that he could see an uptick going forward, but Julio Jones is a really, really legit piece. Are we favoring Julio here over James Conner?
Yeah, I mean, without more information, I think that I would go Julio. I mean, I think realistically, if you're looking at 2 teams and one team needs a running back, the other team needs a wide receiver, and you're trying to make a deal, I think it's fair enough, to swap those guys. But I would prefer Julio straight up, yeah.
Yeah, the ceiling potential from Julio is really hard for me to pass up. Tanantha, any interest in DeAndre Washington potentially taking over the Miami backfield? Washington was traded for this past week, but was ineligible to play due to the COVID-19 protocols, had to test negative for, I believe, 5 consecutive days and couldn't clear that hurdle, but now should get in a full week of practice here for Miami. So are you looking at DeAndre Washington, or would you pick a prioritize a guy like Savon Ahmed over him?
Yeah, so I'm looking at Matt Breida potentially coming back too. He had that hamstring injury. I think he like maybe sort of practiced. Maybe he didn't practice last week. I can't remember totally,
He
but
didn't practice at all, I don't believe. At least that was
yeah,
through Thursday. I don't remember checking Friday. So
yeah.
I
I think it was like one of those things where it was like iffy. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But at least like just reading between the lines there, it looked like he might have. So maybe he plays this week. And if that's the case, I think he has the most intriguing upside within that backfield. But then, like you mentioned, Savon Ahmed, I mean, he looks good this past week. He had by far the highest success rate in that backfield when you compare him to Jordan Howard, who's just complete dust. He's a speedy guy. He's not someone who's necessarily going to take on this massive workload. But it's hard to envision a scenario where DeAndre Washington steps in and becomes Myles Gaskin. And who knows, Myles Gaskin might be back too. I mean, eventually. I mean, I know he's on short-term IR right now, but I don't know exactly how that situation is going to unfold either. So what I'm basically saying is you're throwing darts right now. And the way that I would throw darts, I would probably put Matt Breida first and hope that he can come back. And then I'd put Ahmed second, I think. I would not be touching Jordan Howard even if he's seeing goal line work. And then, yeah, sure, I would maybe put Washington third and just throw a dart in a deeper league.
Yeah, the strategy there is ABH, anything but Howard. Chris is asking, you've mentioned that handcuffing running backs is not optimal early season, but now we're getting later in the run. So is now the time to start getting handcuffs for guys like Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey? He actually specifically mentioned trading for those guys because obviously Alexander Mattison and Mike Davis probably already rostered. What value would you trade for their handcuffs? And I think that this is a different situation here because it sounds like he may be asking if you have Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey, would you be trading for their backups? So just give your overall philosophy on handcuffs when it comes to week 10 and beyond.
Yeah. So I did a handcuff study a few years ago, and it basically told us, the data did, that not only do we not know who the handcuffs are when injuries happen and guys step in, so we get that wrong all the time. I mean, there's some guys that we can probably project fairly confidently, like Zeke to Tony Pollard, and we saw to a degree with Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison, even though Amir Abdullah was getting some receiving work. But not only do we not know that, but when guys step in and actually play for the starting running back, they're not as productive. I think part of that is likely because good running backs demand more volume in their backfield, and those guys just aren't going to see as much volume. I mean, these running backs are good, and the running backs that we are handcuffing are stud running backs, right? Like, we're not going to be handcuffing Raheem Mostert or anything like that. But we're definitely trying to handcuff a guy like Dalvin Cook because we think that Alexander Mattison would step in and at least give us RB2-ish production, which I think that he would. So at the beginning of the season, I generally am not holding on to those handcuffs or drafting those handcuffs because it's generally a wasted roster spot. Not only that, what I did in the study, and I looked at when injuries actually occur to these stud running backs, usually happens around week 7 or 8. So it's not even going to happen early in the season. So you're just holding this bench spot for this guy who's not doing anything for your lineup. But we get to a point in time in the season where having a handcuff is not a bad idea as a high floor play. Generally, if you are going to go after a handcuff, my advice early in the season is to go after a handcuff of another running back that you don't have, which I know is not very intuitive because it doesn't really mean handcuff anymore. But, if you have, let's say, a stud running back, but not Dalvin Cook, go get Alexander Mattison, because if something were to happen to Dalvin Cook, all of a sudden you have both the stud running back and Alexander Mattison. It's a high variance play. But if you're sitting right now and you have one loss and you're in good shape, go ahead and play go the safety route and get a guy like Madison and back up your stud running backs that going into the playoffs that you have at least some sort of safety net, right? So in your case, if you're trading for these guys, if you're trading for Madison, I don't know if I would go that far. But if I'm doing that, I'm certainly not giving up a starter in my lineup to get that player. I'm just giving up some bench players. And there's enough, if you can give up like a JD McKissick for Alexander Mattison, sure, go for it.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is it's important to keep in mind team context. You mentioned a team that has one loss, but if you're a team that's like a fringe playoff team and doesn't really have the ammo to win the championship, that's a situation where you still want to shoot for the upside and get the backups for other running backs. Right. So I think keep in mind where your team is at and adjust based on that. Joe is asking, would you drop Jonnu Smith for Austin Hooper? Jonnu Smith, also known as Anthony Furcher's backup. Would you drop Jonnu for Austin Hooper?
So I had Austin Hooper as an add/buy in 15 transactions this week. I don't know if I would just drop Jonnu. I would find a way to have both of those guys and sort of rotate tight end week in and week out because we saw a nice ceiling from Jonnu earlier in the season. The problem is that ceiling with Jonnu was sort of when, AJ Brown was injured and then he was coming back and, he wasn't as involved in that offense. And I think, not only has the injury hurt Jonnu, but I think that's hurt Jonnu a little bit as well. And it's not the most pass-friendly offense in the world either, so that's going to hurt him too. But with Austin Hooper, across the season before this appendicitis, he had a 20% target share per game. And now there's no Odell Beckham. And then from here on out, according to adjusted fantasy points allowed, the method that I use, Cleveland tight ends have one of the most advantageous matchups from here through the end of the season. So I would not be shocked if Austin Hooper's like a top 6-ish tight end from here on out. I'm pretty bullish on him in general. But there's a lot of guys sort of in that bucket, in my opinion. There's a lot of like Hayden Hurst. I think he's in Dallas Goedert. I think you can probably throw in there too. Would I drop Jonnu straight up? I think that's iffy. If there's I'm okay with holding multiple tight ends in this case.
Yeah, and I think that with Austin Hooper, he's also $5,100 on FanDuel this weekend, so just going to throw that out there as well. Samantha is asking about some guys you mentioned in 15 transactions, specifically Breida, Duke Johnson, and Kalen Ballage. Would you drop Gio Bernard, Jamal Williams, or Laviska Shenault for any of those guys? Again, the list is Gio Bernard, Jamal Williams, and Laviska Shenault. Yeah,
so I think it goes back to what we were talking about before with handcuffs and where you're at. So with Gio, we first have to make sure that Joe Mixon is going to play this week. And the same goes for Aaron Jones. But if they do play, then obviously Gio and Jamal Williams don't have that much value. I would drop Gio before Jamal Williams because I think that there's some chance that Williams has some standalone value because he played so well and because they do rotate those running backs a decent bit, whereas Joe Mixon had an absurd running back rush share, before going down. Maybe his target share fluctuated a little bit, but he was starting to see a good target share too. And then Laviska Shenault, he got injured this past week. I don't know where things are at with that. And he really hasn't been the most usable wide receiver in the world. So I think I would drop Laviska first, Gio second, Jamal third, and then who were the three? Duke,
it
Ballage.
Was Duke, Breida, and Ballage.
Yeah, I would probably go in that order in terms of adding players, but obviously, David Johnson and his concussion matters a lot for Duke. So if we hear that David Johnson's going to be fine or something like that this week, then obviously Ballage becomes a better add than Duke. But you might not have that information by the time you have to add these guys.
And with Shenault, the long-term outlook is still good, but what are the odds you'll feel good using him?
Yeah, right.
I don't know. Very low. Right. It sounds like he'll be good to play this week based on the initial report on Monday, but still, you're never going to start him with confidence. Francis, is Joe Burrow good for the rest of the year, or should I continue to stream the position? He faces Pittsburgh twice. That's a little frightening. When they give up big passes, but Cincinnati's offensive line,
exactly,
not ideal. How are we feeling about Joe Burrow for Week 10 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Anytime you get these matchups, like against even Tampa Bay, I was bullish on Drew Brees this past week, and I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back by any means, but I was bullish on Drew Brees this past week. Because that's one of the few teams that could probably stop that pass rush for Tampa Bay. And that was the real reason Tampa Bay's defense has been as good as it's been, is because they've gotten this pass rush. They have the second best pressure rate in football. Well, Pittsburgh has the best pressure rate in football. They're secondary in terms of pieces. There are a couple guys that are fine, but they're still beatable. I mean, there's a reason why they've given up so many big plays this year. Part of it is because they love to send pressure, but also because it's a beatable secondary in some way. But if Cincinnati had a better offensive line, like if this were Cleveland, let's say, and maybe Baker wasn't their quarterback, but if it were Cleveland and Joe Burrow was behind that offensive line, I'd feel a little bit better about Burrow. But Burrow against Pittsburgh, I can't do it with that offensive line. It wouldn't shock me if he comes through and, has a 40-yard rushing line and is able to put together a game where he has 18 to 20 fantasy points. That wouldn't shock me at all. But in terms of just if I'm looking at Jared Goff versus Joe Burrow this week, I'm going with Jared Goff.
Yeah, Jared Goff against a team that doesn't get pass rush is that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, exactly.
Darnell, would you drop or would you grab a Jalen Reagor if you already have Travis Fulgham? Travis Fulgham has earned a starting role for Philadelphia, obviously, but Jalen Reagor, even with Alshon Jeffrey trending towards being back, is probably going to play and probably going to get targets too. So would having Fulgham deter you from adding Jalen Reagor off of waivers?
No, and look, I went to Twitter yesterday and I made the comment that Jalen Reagor is still out there in 76% of Yahoo leagues right now. And people were like, well, he's a rookie and he didn't do anything in his game that he came back. He found the end zone, but he didn't do anything when he came back from his injury. Yeah,
he
like
led the team in air yards, or
yeah,
the second behind Hightower, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, he had like a 23% target share, higher than a 23% target share. Like he was fine. Like it's coming off an injury. And not only that, but Philadelphia has an unbelievable schedule from here on out for that passing attack. There should be a lot of high scoring games. So if you have Fulgham, yeah, I'm a fan of just getting as much value and as many good players as I possibly can on my fantasy roster, and then just worry about it once those guys are on my team. But the other thing too, just as an aside, everyone's saying, oh, like giving me excuses as to why they're not adding Jalen Reagor. Des Bryant is rostered in 28% of Yahoo leagues. Des Bryant has a higher
2020.
In 2020. So if you have Des Bryant right now or someone like that on your roster, drop him immediately and get Jalen Reagor.
Man. That's great. Okay, so the other thing, too, that's worth noting of the Eagles is that Lane Johnson seems like he'll be back. Isaac Seumalo may not be back, but he is designated to return from IR, which means he should be back kind of soon. And that's going to be good for the entire offense, both Fulgham and Reagor. So I think overall, the Eagles' offense could be in for an uptick down the stretch outside of the schedule that you alluded to. Nicholas, Goff, Tua, or Bridgewater to pick up and start this week. Jared Goff gets Seattle in a disgustingly fun game. Tua gets the Chargers against Justin Herbert, and then Bridgewater gets the Buccaneers. A little scary there. How would you rank, or who do you prioritize between those three?
Yeah, I would probably go. I mean, I'd definitely go with Goff, and then I'd probably rank them Goff to Teddy. Because of that Bucs defense that we talked about. Again, the Bucs defense is not a great matchup, even though Drew Brees did what he did. It's just that offensive line can generally handle that kind of pressure.
And with Russell Okung not at full health, I don't think the Panthers can. That's scary for sure. Samir is asking, defense for this week, would you drop Washington for Detroit or Miami? No other decent options available on the waiver wire. So Miami's defense has been very good. Like they've been among the best defenses in football this year, but they're facing Justin Herbert. Detroit is facing, I believe, Washington this week. Yes, they're facing Washington. So do you want Washington, Detroit, or Miami, all things considered here?
I mean, I guess I'm going Washington because of the, I don't know what's going on with Stafford right now. If Chase Daniel plays, then look, Washington has a good defensive line. They can get to the quarterback. It should be a lowish over-under game. It should be fairly close. It's probably not going to be like a massive shootout or anything. I think they're a safe option. The thing with Miami that's interesting, as you noted, Jim, I think 5 of their last 6 games, they've been like a top 6 defense in fantasy. And they faced, last week they had Arizona. They had the Rams a couple weeks ago. The main reason, though, I think that so they've played well. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. I'm not trying to downplay how they've performed. But the main reason that things have looked the way they've looked is that against these bad opponents, they've just done their job and they've done well. Like they played the Jets and they played San Francisco. But these good opponents, like the Rams, they did play really well against the Rams. The defense did, but they also had 2 touchdowns, right? So that's going to skew things. Last week, they weren't that amazing. They were just able to get that touchdown, which really skewed things. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they would have been one of the worst defenses of the week. So, you can look at how they've performed, and I do think that we should give them a lot of credit. And I think they are a top half defense right now. But at the same time, I don't think that they're this like plug and play option that some people are selling them as. I'd be a little bit hesitant to say that. But yeah, long story short, I would probably just stick with Washington. Yeah,
so Shrikant, hopefully that answers your question as well, in addition to Samir's. Let's go to Bradley here. Better pickup, Wayne Gallman or Duke Johnson? We don't know about the status of David Johnson yet. We also don't know about the status of Devontae Freeman. Wayne Gallman has been splitting carries with Alfred Morris, whereas Duke might have more of a role if David Johnson were to play. But with the information we have right now, JJ, who do you prefer between those two?
It's tough. It depends on your roster. Like if you need someone longer term, I guess Gallman is a little bit more intriguing. But I think if you're looking strictly at this week, I would risk it. And I would go with Duke Johnson because I don't like trusting the backfield for New York. There is a chance that maybe Devontae Freeman comes back. I know he's your boy, Jim, but I'm probably going to lean Duke there.
Yeah, that's okay. I can't push back. They won't give him the ball. So, free Wayne Gallman. But until then, whatever. Ben, Derrick Henry or Dalvin Cook rest of season. Now, Derrick Henry was a buy in 15 transactions. And you mentioned that his playoff schedule it made me drool, honestly. But Dalvin Cook is Dalvin Cook. So pick one. I'm not taking the one. You have to.
So, so here's the thing. Dalvin Cook doesn't have the easiest schedule in the playoffs. Derrick Henry, I believe, this is off the top of my head, I think it's Green Bay, Detroit, and Jacksonville. You guys can fact check me. But those 3 matchups are 3 of the best matchups you can possibly find on paper. And so I'm not going to be shocked at all if Derrick Henry is a, quote, league winner, as people say, because he's going to do so well between weeks 14 to 16. It would be very, very hard for me right now, though, given the usage that Dalvin Cook has had, given his receiving workload versus Derrick Henry's. I mean, you're talking like double to triple the target share, essentially, that you're going to get with Dalvin Cook versus a Derrick Henry type, probably more double. But I can't say Derrick Henry here. But again, it would not shock me at all if Derrick Henry wins leagues this year.
It's the way to view it. Like, Dalvin Cook objectively is the better option. Yeah. The only reason we're even considering this is because of Derrick Henry's schedule. So keep that in mind as well. Critical 808 is asking, should I drop Tom Brady to pick up Josh Allen on waivers? Why is Josh Allen on waivers? We pick up Josh Allen here and log out, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, though, again, speaking of playoff schedules, Tom Brady has a really good playoff schedule, so he's someone that I actually am sort of buying right now, even though I don't buy quarterbacks. It's just that he's coming off that horrific performance against the Saints, really good playoff schedule. So if for people not asking this question, yes, I would prefer Josh Allen over Tom Brady. Yeah. But for people not asking this question and wondering about Tom Brady, I do like him as a buy low right now.
Okay, we're going to finish up here with 2 Panthers questions. First one from Itachi. Should I waste my waiver priority on Mike Davis given the injury to Christian McCaffrey? Sounds like McCaffrey's day-to-day. Initial thoughts were that he could play through it, but might be a pain tolerance thing. So would you add Mike Davis with that in mind?
I think the answer is no if I'm burning a waiver priority. And the main reason is because, so first off, we started to see Mike Davis's workload be a little bit iffier down the stretch before Christian McCaffrey came back. Like, his target share specifically wasn't as massive and insane as it was whenever
Curtis Samuel's getting backfield snaps as well.
Right. Curtis Samuel getting more work. I mean, Curtis Samuel has like a 22% target share over the last 3 weeks for Carolina. So there's reasons why Mike Davis, isn't a locked in running back 1 if CMC misses time. But then on top of that, he gets Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay is good against running backs. So because of that, I don't think that I would burn it, because obviously the other outcome here is that Christian McCaffrey just plays.
Right, exactly. And it's hard to feel super confident in Mike Davis if he can't go. And that's the big concern for me. Samir is asking a semi-related question because he brought up Curtis Samuel. He wants permission to drop DJ Moore.
Oh,
I can't do it.
I can't do it either.
I think that you can downgrade DJ Moore, but I can't drop him. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, look, the correlation between them using Curtis Samuel more in that offense and DJ Moore not seeing as much volume and not being it's fine. We had this blip this past week. It's fine that a guy doesn't have that big of a target share in one game. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but I think it's because, even though his final numbers were okay enough against Atlanta, we all watched the game. It was a primetime game, and Moore didn't see a target until the final drive of that game, essentially. And so that's why people are so tilted, and I understand it. And then the Curtis Samuel usage is also driving this point home too, that Moore's just not being used the way that we would like him to be used. Would I drop him? Probably not. I can't imagine that there's someone on your waiver wire with as much upside as DJ Moore.
Okay, final one. I said that was the final one, but I lied because there are 2 straight questions asking, is Marquise Brown droppable?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go with the same answer that I just gave with DJ Moore. I can't imagine there are guys on your waiver wire that have as much upside as Hollywood. We need a higher target share for him. We need more passing volume in general in that offense, but that's probably not going to happen. But the plus is they actually get a very good playoff schedule. The Ravens do. So with Hollywood, with Mark Andrews to a degree too, I think that you should either hold. I wouldn't necessarily buy. I think it's risky to buy, but they do have a better schedule upcoming.
And I think the important thing with Marquise Brown from this past week is that they were playing their first game with no Ronnie Stanley against a really good defensive line. So it made a lot of sense that they had this dink and dunk short passing game. I wouldn't expect that necessarily to be the total game plan for the Ravens the rest of the way. That is all the time that we have for today. But once again, 2 more streams coming up this week. On Friday, we have our snake draft with JJ, me, and Brandon Gadula. And then on Sunday, JJ answers your start-sit questions for week number 10. That is at noon Eastern. So make sure you are subscribed to the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope pages to get notifications as we go live and get those questions in for all of those sessions. JJ, appreciate the time. Where can people find 15 transactions?
Yeah, so the article's over on numberFire.com, and then the podcast where I give a 16th transaction on the podcast, you can find on the Late Round podcast, which can be found anywhere podcast can be found.
All right. Big thank you to JJ. Follow him on Twitter at LateRoundQB. I am on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck with those waivers tonight, and good luck in Week 10. We'll talk to you again soon. This has been the Waiver Wire Q&A.